What if you could walk away from a secure career in the city, build two high growth tech companies, and exit with your sanity intact? Well, that's exactly what Gary Abela has done. From the skyscrapers in the City of London to the front lines of applied AI, Gary's journey is anything but ordinary. He has built software companies in some of the most complex regulated industries on earth, and not only survived, but thrived. In this episode, we go deep into what it really takes to get a tech startup off the ground, how to scale a business without losing control, the truth about exiting a company and what no one tells you, and where Gary sees massive opportunities for founders in fintech and AI right now. Whether you're building your first company or planning your last one, this is an episode full of practical wisdom, honest reflections, and real founder energy. Now let's get into it. Here's my conversation with tech entrepreneur and recent founder exit, Mr. Gary Abela. Hey, Gary, good to see you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Alan. I'm honored to be here and quite humbled, to be honest with you. So thank you for the invite.
It's great. You're a very, very busy guy, and tying you down, you've been doing all sorts of things today, which we can catch up with you about. But when I start these conversations, and they're usually with entrepreneurs and people who've been through sort of interesting adventures on their business journey, I'm always keen to go back to the beginning and find out sort of how it all started and really your background and your upbringing. I mean, for example, were you brought up in an entrepreneurial family?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really important thing to start with. It's not something I often talk about, but yeah, my family are immigrants from the island of Malta. My mother and my father got married at 17 and 19,
Wow.
emigrated to London on their honeymoon and never left. And worked in the hotel business, actually, just around the corner from here, St. John's Wood,
Really?
looking after other people's hotels, and then developed a work ethic that meant they could have their own hotel. And so I was raised in King's Cross bed and breakfasts in the 80s. So you can imagine the upbringing that I had. It was somewhat colourful. Yeah.
To say the least. Do you know what? I was in King's Cross the other day, and do you know that's a new development they've got? And I was just saying to the person I was with, I said, this is probably one of the most successful urban redevelopments has ever been, because I was just about in the 80s, maybe in the 90s, I was sort of knocking about that sort of area, and it wasn't the most salubrious of
It
areas, was
wasn't
it?
at all. No. So
Yeah.
half of the hotel, when I was growing up at least, was effectively DSS and
Yeah.
workers that would come down to work on
Right.
building sites. Today, the family business, which I left very early on, but my brothers still run the business, and yeah, it's now a boutique hotel on Argyle Street. So
Nice.
it's a very different area. It's lovely to see the change.
So you grew up though in that, obviously your mom and dad doing that, building their own business, and
We all lived in one room.
wow.
Me and my two brothers on bunk beds, and my mum and dad in the same room, because obviously your space in a hotel is revenue.
Yeah, for
And so
sure.
if you're living in it and trying to build a business, we all worked in a business. I was serving breakfast to tourists and builders from the age of 7.
Wow.
So yeah, entrepreneurial very much so. I kind of owe a lot of my insights and I suppose my work ethic to my
Yeah.
family and to my brothers and my mum and dad. I think it's important that they instilled in us the value of money
Yeah,
and the value of what hard work and dedication requires. You know, running a hotel business is a 24/7 job, you
for
know,
sure.
particularly when you're living in it and it's also your home. So we only really had our own home probably when I was in my teenage years.
Right.
So I was always doing my homework in the dining room whilst there were guests, sort of taking a chill, but always very comfortable speaking to people as a result. So, you know, I was very comfortable in dealing with, you know, people that I don't know and understanding their stories. And so I owe a lot of that to my ability to then do sales as a function,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I quite enjoy it. I quite enjoy meeting people and hearing their stories. And yeah, that's from a young age.
Really, really interesting. And that's I didn't know that about
Mm.
you. And we share that same background because at various points in my upbringing, my parents also owned hotels, they owned
Okay.
pubs and all that. And I tell you one thing I learned, it's a hard way to make money.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, look,
It's
anything in the service-based industry is a hard way
yeah,
to make money.
yeah, it is.
That being said, I think hotel business model today, particularly in central London,
Mm,
is a very good cash cow type of business,
yeah.
which if you can run it efficiently and, you know, the operating model behind it can
Mm,
scale, actually it becomes a really good, you know, EBITDA multiple. It's a
mm.
very, very profitable business once you get it right.
Interesting. Well, that's another opportunity
That's
for
another
you. That's
opportunity.
some
If I
future
ever get
date.
back into the family business.
Okay, so You said there, which I can fully understand, that sort of those early experiences helped you sort of begin. You're thinking about sales.
Mm.
You thought sales could be a good career for you to, because I know that you ended up in the City of London
Yeah.
in sales jobs. Is that was that kind of the natural evolution? Tell me what happened from the family business, the hotel business, and the next thing I knew from your background was you were working a sales job.
I was, yeah. So I didn't naturally want to go into sales. Actually, I reluctantly fell into sales.
Right.
I didn't have the confidence I thought to be a sales guy initially. My father's actually literate, doesn't read or write, very successful businessman in his own right, but he effectively taught me the art of the hustle, and being able to have a street smartness that I
Mm,
think, from an academic perspective, you often tend to miss. And so I was the only member of my family. I'm the youngest, and so by the time I obviously came around, the times weren't as hard as they probably had been for my
yeah.
older brother, who's 11 years older than I am. But I was only one that went to university, and so my father was quite big on education, not necessarily because he believed in it as a construct, given his own journey,
Mm,
but more so in, I think, the chip he had on his shoulder for the limitation he had in business, for not being able to scale and to do multiple businesses, because he'd often always have to work with a partner that could read and could do all the legals and could speak
mhm,
English correctly.
right.
So I went into education purely to keep my father happy, if I'm being honest with you.
Yeah.
I read economics at university. I quite enjoyed the social side of university more than
Sure.
the academic
Yeah.
side, to be honest with you. And fell into my first job as a sales advisor on the phones in a call center for a big insurance company. And that was a big American firm that I think really laid the foundations then for me falling into sales,
Mm,
and learnt the trade, which I think too often, particularly with some of the younger team that I see come through and think of sales as a function, forget that it is a trade, it's a skill set.
yeah.
It's not just simply having a conversation, it's having it with purpose.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I think the arts of selling has changed somewhat.
Yeah, I'd
And I
agree.
think
I'd agree with you. Were you given sales training?
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I worked for a company called the Hartford,
Yeah.
big American-based life company. Kind of came into the UK market. So I graduated uni 2002. So yeah, my first job actually 2002, 2003. And they had an American approach to selling to financial
Mm,
advisors. And obviously in the US domestic market, large territories, you loop your territories, you're out on the road a lot, you're in
mm,
your car, you're very rarely home, you're in some godforsaken hotel on a motorway somewhere, and you have a lots of crystal glasses and umbrellas in your back boot of your car, and you're knocking on doors, a bit like the man from the Pru, I
right.
suppose,
Yeah.
did in the UK. But they had an incredible way of picking up talent.
Mm,
So most of the people I was actually the first team when they launched in the UK. And so US entrant in the UK market back then was a difficult place to be. So a couple of other US
yeah.
players had come in and come out again. So trust was quite hard to build. But they approached everything in having a conversation about people's businesses, actually.
Mm,
Had nothing to do about selling the product. Of course, you have a product that you're selling that has features and benefits, but it was about how do we make your business grow exponentially as a result of the approach that we can teach you
yeah.
from the lessons that we learned in the US. And that I thought was a very unique way, and why they did so incredibly well, I think, in the UK
Yeah.
market.
It's so interesting because from my observation on the last decade or so, it's like the art of selling has been forgotten about. It's a sort of, it seems to be a dying art, almost a dirty word.
Yeah,
And as you know, I work in financial services and we're all about kind of servicing, looking after the client, what have
yeah,
you. And people forget that nothing happens unless a sale is made. And, sadly, for a lot of the big companies, you may mention like the man from the Pru or whatever, but these huge institutions, for all their faults, possibly did a lot of training, a lot of sales training. How to convince, how to express yourself, how to identify issues and problems with your potential
yeah.
customer, and sell your product. And no one's going to buy it if they don't need it or don't want it. But you obviously were well trained in that. And
100%. I owe a lot of my sort of unconscious approach to the job
mm,
because of those early formative years. And big firms like that have very in-depth training programs,
yeah,
and they drill you until you get it right. And the Americans have an incredible ability to communicate in a very articulate way that's to the point,
Yeah.
but also enables you to go along a journey and tell a story.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things that I try to do with lots of my partnerships team, as we like to call them now, rather than salespeople,
Sure.
to your point,
Yeah.
is remember the emotion of what you're doing in anything that you do. And you're dealing with another human. And that empathy and that rapport that you can build is half the challenge. Everything
Absolutely.
else actually is secondary to that. That's your foot in the door that says, I trust you and I want to do business with you.
Yeah. Absolutely. That's where
Yeah.
everything starts.
100%.
Yeah.
In everything.
Completely.
No.
So you're there at the Hartford.
Yeah.
And what, stay there for a while before you moved on? I know you went into other roles in the city.
I did. So I was at the Hartford. I was just on the phone supporting salespeople actually and supporting advisors that were calling in. I managed to last, I think, 6 months in that role, and then I got graduated to having my own patch.
Okay.
So I was 20, just turned 21 or 22, I think. So I was one of the youngest sales reps in the history of the company, actually. And I remember I had a very senior leader from the US called Patty Bosco, and I'll forever remember the training program because you went through a rotation, and then the end of that rotation was a big pitch of the presentation in front of the entire company. And I remember I was petrified of public speaking at the time. I felt like I nailed it. And the only critique, and they would give you critique at the end, the only critique she had, I was wearing winkle pickers at the time, some pointy shoes. And she said those shoes have to go for the financial advice space. So she went and bought me a pair of designer shoes, some sort of accountancy man looking shoes.
Nice.
But I thought that was a really nice touch because it showed that personal approach
Yeah.
to we believe in you. And so then I went gung-ho. I moved out from London to Chelmsford because you had to be in your patch. I looked after East Anglia. I didn't have a car at that point. I barely drove, to be honest with you, because I was living in London. Bought a car, which I had to pay for, and then went on my merry way of running advisory broker sales support across East Anglia, to driving up to Norwich, to Chelmsford, leaping my territory, living on my own for the first time. Although I went to university, I was still quite young, I think, to make a big jump like that. But I was very ambitious, and I knew that in that model, you could actually become very successful, even though you wasn't quite, in a portfolio manager's role in some big bank, which is, as an economics graduate, exactly where I wanted to be.
That's
The
what you-
reality,
yeah,
the reality is my academic results weren't good enough to get anywhere close.
But the American, I've never worked for an American company, but I know quite a few who have, and I've always felt from what I've heard that they really are a meritocracy. You know, if you're good and you're hardworking and you're decent at sales, then you can get promoted. They don't necessarily just look for your the highest level of qualifications.
No, absolutely. And I think look about the recruiting standards, they had picked a whole bunch of people that weren't from the industry. We
Right.
had an estate agent that was on the program. We had a guy from Schroders on the program, so obviously somebody from the industry. I think the lady that went and sold the Franken machine, which is the printing machine, did such a good sales job of selling the machine. She got a job then in financial service. And their approach was, we can train you everything you need to know, but what you need to have is some core principles that we can work around. And I think that's the piece in sales more generally. I think we all have it as individuals. We just don't necessarily train it like a muscle.
Yeah, it sounds to me that it's if you've got the soft skills or you've got the ability to learn them, embrace them, and demonstrate them, to some degree, it almost doesn't matter what the product is. We'll teach you about the product, but if you've got the ability to build rapport, to build empathy, to build trust with your prospective customer, then we'll work out a product that we can sell to you. So they were looking for good quality salespeople wherever they existed, and then train them up in their own unique way.
And I think there's a level underneath that actually is just being inquisitive enough to want to understand about somebody else.
Yeah.
I always was told early on, you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, and that should be the ratio of what you do in a conversation.
Exactly.
And I think if you're not really actively listening because you care and you're learning something, then you're not going to be very good at building that rapport because people want to be heard.
Do just listening to you there, and we will in a few moments jump forward to you kind of when you started doing things for yourself in your entrepreneurial journey. But I mean, there's never been a successful business that doesn't have sales at its core. And if you later on in your sort of on your business journey were, as a founder, and you had the ability to ask good questions, to listen carefully, and to sort of deliver solutions to it, that your chances of success clearly are going to be that much greater than if you just weren't. I mean, you were just a product person, for example. So those early grounding days that you had when you were learning your craft obviously bore fruit later on in as your career developed.
100%. And also ensured that I found the right co-founders that had
Mm,
complementary skill sets to mine to be able to then be a successful business. Um,
interesting. Yeah.
and I think that's another thing that I think is misunderstood about salespeople. You have this ideology. To your point, it's a dirty word
Mm,
sometimes. And there's always a sales and marketing time of friction in every organization.
yeah.
But salespeople inherently want to work in teams because
Yeah.
actually you can't do it on your own.
Mm,
And so that ability to work in a team and understand that we're stronger together
mm.
is another important aspect when you're selling complex products. And I ended up selling AI. And if you told me,
Yeah.
25 years ago that I was going to be doing AI, I would have told you absolutely not. I'm not a technical person or
Yeah.
technical bone in my body, but
Yeah.
managed to get it through in the end.
You sure did. You sure did. So what happened? You stayed there for a while and then you moved on career-wise?
Yeah, I stayed there for a while. And look, I think you could make an incredible amount of money on the commissions that you could earn in firms like that. Some of the biggest writers in America were doing over $1 million in,
Mm,
you know, income over the
yeah.
year. But I think a number of different factors. I think going out so soon and so early was a risk. I definitely didn't enjoy it at first. It was sort of greenfield type of work. Nobody knew who we were. It was
Mm,
hard. You got lots of rejections. People are very busy. I used to have to go into big offices that I knew were writing a lot of business, and you would never get on the phone because you would never get through the receptionist. So I used to go in with like donuts or whatever I could do every time I was in the region and just be persistent
yeah.
to eventually have them say, "Do you know what? Come in and have a chat and let's see what you've got."
Right.
Um, I very quickly, having done economics, and to be honest with you, wanting to have got into either banking or trading, and to some extent feeling like there was something more, I realized quickly on that within the finance sector, at least, the insurance companies, but to some extent, a distribution force for people that were actually managing the money.
Mm,
And so I took an opportunity to move into asset management when I saw it. And I've had a good ability of kind of jumping ship or moving to the next thing before the current thing that you're in becomes too entrenched in your psyche or you become too addicted to the money
right.
to leave,
Yeah.
and that risk reward.
Mm,
And so I jumped before I built such a successful business at the Hartford that I wouldn't leave. And so yeah, I only lasted really for 3 years, I think, in the end, and then went into Leg Mason and started again on the phones. I went back a step. I wasn't doing sales, but I was doing more institutional sales around funds and, equity and bonds types of products. So I learned an awful lot again there.
yeah.
Uh,
So, I mean, for those who don't know, Leg Mason is a huge American institutional fund manager, asset manager, not as well known in this country, though they've got
yeah.
a decent sized operation here, but huge in the States, aren't they? Multi
Yeah,
billions
they're a
of,
S&P 500 listed firm. They
yeah,
had over $1 trillion in
right,
assets under management at
right.
one point.
Serious player.
A
Yeah,
multi-affiliate model, very complex business to sell because there's lots of things in your suitcase, so to
yeah,
speak,
yeah,
and very much an institutional shop. So
yeah.
again, selling that to the advice community was a challenge.
Mm,
But I think I've just developed a skill set or I don't know, a flaw in my psyche to love to do the hard things. And I ended up driving their advisory distribution by the end of my career. And I was there for, gosh, nearly 11 years in the end.
right.
So various different roles from
Yeah.
client service to manager. My first management job as well, I was a manager at 24, which was also too young in
Yeah.
hindsight. I'd made
Yeah.
a lot of mistakes with it.
Wow. So that's quite, because you're still there, but at this point, you're still very young, really, when
Yeah.
you go through the whole process. But at some point, because I know that where you end up in almost an entirely different
Mm.
area. Tell me about the pivot. You left
Yeah.
Leg Mason, and then what was the next step? Because as I suspect you're beginning to really open up your own entrepreneurial journey after that. This is historically working for big employers, big sort of PAYE. There's some security around that, and there's lots of learning to be done. But then you sort of start to look elsewhere. I think look over the horizon for other opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that goes back to my father again, go back
Yeah.
to that beginning. I think I very quickly realized, I think, the value of money and what wealth was vis-a-vis earning an income.
Mm.
And so in the best will in the world, if you're a salaried guy and you can be running a very successful business and earning 6, sometimes 7-figure salaries, there's a limitation to, I think, what you can do with your life if you're a builder. And I think the penny dropped for me on a number of different reasons in hindsight. But I had at the time, and this is maybe relevant or not so interesting for the audience, but robo advice was a big thing 10 years ago. It was the first sort of tech enabled journey that people were really jumping on. And the US firm had asked me to kind of start to do some tech sort of scouting in the space. And to be honest, it was my first insight into technology. You know, apart from the emails that I would use and the CRM system I would use, I never really thought of tech as a piece. And I got very excited about it, incorrectly in the end, because actually it wasn't a good enough technology for where the market needed to go. But it made me learn two things. We were trying to do an acquisition in the space, and it didn't end up being an acquisition, mainly because I think large firms struggle with making decisions when they become an individual's decision, because there's too much personal risk attached to it.
Right.
So I realized quickly that actually innovation is quite hard at big corporate. And at the time, simultaneously, I'd already started kind of building a property portfolio in Berlin. The honest truth of that, it was sheer luck. I was quite a party boy in my 20s, and Berlin was obviously the place to be. Very quickly realized how cheap the property market was there. And having been in a really good job, earning some decent salary, I sat there and thought, well, I can either go and do what usual people in the city do, which is spend their bonus on a really expensive holiday, or if they're really good, a Porsche or something like that.
Yeah.
And I realized now actually I'd rather make my money work for me. And I saw property prices that, you know, I couldn't afford what I built in Berlin, in London at the time. And so went on a journey of building a portfolio with my business partner and life partner at the time, and scaled that quite rapidly actually as a side hustle on top of the job. And back then, Airbnb wasn't a regulated piece. It was really new. I come from the hotel industry. And so
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
ironically, I ended up doing the thing I was running away from, which was to go and work for my dad in the family business. I ended up recreating it. The same problems around doing business with your family. I was doing business with my partner,
Yeah.
and I was ultimately in the tourist industry. So that side hustle effectively started to make me more money than my job.
Right.
And so I sat there in my early 30s thinking, okay, I've got financial independence to some extent, or I've got freedom that I can either choose to double down on that and then do something that I really want to test myself again, or I can just keep it as a side piece. During the same time, my mother passed away quite suddenly, sadly. And that was a real hard lesson for me to understand, what does good look like and how are you going to be happy with your life? And that having been in the industry since I was 21, worked really, really hard to get to the positions I got to, I started to really reflect and think, well, what's the purpose here? You know, is the money really what's driving me, or do I need something more? I didn't really know the answer. I'm not sure I know the answer today, by the way.
Yeah,
But
but at least you stop to think about it, and
I did.
I would say that a lot of us probably don't. Where, you
Yeah.
know, one way or another, regardless of, you know, some people are successful, some people less successful, but there is a sense of, you know, the hamster wheel. We just go, and I think it's really important as well to do. People don't do this often enough. I don't do it often enough. Is to pause for breath, to stop, look around you, look how far you've come. Which
Yeah.
by that time you'd come a long, long way, and obviously with the sad passing of your mother,
Yeah.
it's a chance just to, you know, take a breath and say, what's the next 5, 10 years going to look like for you?
Yeah.
So that's obviously what you did.
I did. I don't necessarily, you know, I could sit here and say it was very astute of me to think like that. I think the reality is I was dealing with a lot of grief,
Yeah.
and I think the one thing that I've learned is adversity is really the best driver for change. You know, we're human species at the end of the day. We usually go in survival mode, and I think that shook my world to a point of forcing me to look elsewhere. But I lent into it, to your point.
Right.
And so I've got an unhealthy relationship to pain in that regard, because I've had a positive outcome in the end. You know,
Right.
as sad as that was, I wouldn't be here today sitting here talking to you had my mother's passing not happened, and had that enlightenment to kind of realize what's important in life
Right.
kind of be thrust upon me.
Sure.
So yeah, I always think everything is an opportunity if you decide to frame it in the right way.
Interesting. So if I hear you correctly, you kind of almost like an accidental entrepreneur. You go
Yeah.
partying in Berlin, you think, looking around, look, the flats are cheap here. Let's
Yeah.
buy one, let's buy another. And before you know it, you've got a portfolio. Airbnb's new on the scene, so
Yeah.
you've got a strong income stream from it.
Yeah.
So what did you eventually leave the investment company? A quick pause. You might not be aware that this podcast is a passion project. It's born from my commitment to supporting entrepreneurs through the business stages of scaling up, selling, and then life on the other side. It's the same work we do at Capital Partners, our boutique wealth planning firm, which is dedicated to helping entrepreneurs to gain clarity around their money, their aspirations, and ultimately achieving financial peace of mind. With over 20 years' experience of working with business owners, our team brings deep insight, strategic thinking, and clarity to what can often be complex decisions. So, what you're really looking for is a trusted advisor, someone who understands people like you and can offer thoughtful guidance at the intersection of business, family, money, and life. In other words, someone to act as your strategic thinking partner and your financial coach. So if that resonates, feel free to explore more. There's a link in the show notes to our website with tools and resources to support you on your journey. Now, let's get back to the conversation.
I did, yeah.
Right.
So I quit my job. Everyone thought I was mad,
Yeah.
including my family.
Yeah.
I was on route to becoming a managing director. I was one of the youngest sort of senior directors at the firm, running quite a successful stream of the business, shall we say.
Mm.
And in my head at the time, I thought I was running a business. I think the jump to then running my own business was completely the opposite of what I thought it would be. And I don't think any corporate job or middle management prepares you for running your own business,
Yeah.
down to HR and dealing with people and finance. If you're running a distribution team, there's a whole company around you supporting you. So it's a very fortunate place to be. So no, I left. Or I ran away, whatever way you want to look at it. And I ran to Berlin. And then I thought that I could just be a landlord, actually. I thought that would be enough. I very quickly got bored. And so then started to look at technology. Back then, 10 years ago, Berlin was a really hot ecosystem. A lot of the big, I say copycat American tech firms were being recreated in Berlin. So there was a real ecosystem building, but quite early on.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to get into tech, but didn't know how to get into tech. And I saw a job for an internship at a big tech festival. And so I applied for an internship with the view that I would ultimately understand the client base and to some extent build a business off the back of it. Went in for an interview and obviously they saw my CV. I'd been running teams, worked for a big firm. And they offered me a job to head up sales for this big technology event, which I didn't know really how to run an event or anything of that nature. But I thought, how hard can it be? One of the hardest jobs I've ever done in my life.
That's the age-old question. I
Yeah.
must say, the entrepreneurs, how hard can it be?
Absolutely. So to some extent, you're ignorant. Ignorance is truly bliss.
If you knew what was ahead of you, you wouldn't do it in the first place. Is
100%.
the whole point.
100%.
All right. So you gave this a go.
I gave this a real go, and it was a real success. Actually, I think they went from it was a 22,000 person event across a whole
Right.
week. So think of South by Southwest for the Europe market, and a really incredible founder, a very visionary guy. We built a team of basically trainees and interns that you'd scale up for the event. You have 4 months to put this thing on. So I started in January. The event was in end of June. They'd made 0 sales at that point, and there was no product to sell. We managed to close the year, I think, 1.6 million in revenue, and I think 200,000 was the most sponsorship revenue they'd got up until that point. So it was a huge success.
Wow.
I built a team around me, had a lot of fun doing it, but I definitely had a bit of a meltdown afterwards. It was highly stressful.
Yeah, but you achieved it. It
I
was
did.
it was a success, and then you collapsed into a heap once it's done, because that was an event in itself.
Yeah. So
And then, but is that one of these things that no sooner you have a break once it's done, then you plan for the following year?
yeah, you definitely scale it down, and most events of that scale do. And it's very difficult to make margin in events.
Yes.
And so obviously the founder saw my revenues and was like, right, do you want to come in business with me and be a co-founder? And I decided against it purely because of that fact, because
Right.
I think the event business model is incredibly difficult.
Okay.
Obviously that was pre-COVID. And so
Yeah.
I'm really glad I made that decision.
Yeah.
But to your point around some luck and, being an entrepreneur without realizing it. I actually met my business partners at CodePan, which was then the beginning of my AI journey.
CodePan was the event
No,
thing
so
that
that
wrote
was Tech Open Air Berlin.
okay, right.
CodePan was a startup run
Okay.
out of the CEO is an Israeli guy called Avi, who saw me and at the event actually,
Right.
and asked me to see if I could do some sales for him.
Good old
Um,
selling coming back again.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of tech entrepreneurs generally aren't naturally, uh, salespeople
Sure.
or
Yeah.
communicators.
Yeah.
And I've always liked to surround myself with people that have a different skill set to mine.
Well, this is coming on to this point, and I think you referred to it earlier on, and it comes up, quite regularly on my conversations here. Co-founders,
Mm,
co-founders with complementary skills, such that 1 + 1 = 3.
yeah,
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm getting this, that sometimes your sort of tech founder, product person, engineer, whatever, aren't necessarily the best communicators. You might not necessarily be the best person at building the product, but you can sell it.
absolutely.
So finding the right co-founder can be absolutely essential, right?
It's vitally important.
Yeah.
And I think that's not just in relation to your skill sets, but I think the one thing that I've learned through the years of doing business with people,
Mm,
which is humans, is do you have the same value system? I think
right.
that's incredibly important because the trials and tribulations of running a business from, the startup world from scratch doesn't prepare you. Nothing can prepare you for those ups and downs and the highs and the lows. And I think you have to have a relationship that goes beyond
Mm,
just work.
mm,
And so you have to have a core value system that you align on it. And that doesn't need to stay consistent because I don't think it does. I think we change as humans, but I think you need to be very honest about how much you deviate away from that. And if you're prepared to then continue to work with each other as a result.
mm.
So yeah, understanding your and a lot of people don't understand their own core value system. So it's
Sure.
really hard to kind of find that partnership.
Yeah. And it's difficult when you find out along the way that you don't share the same values as
Yeah.
the other person, and things you have to sort of separate, you're in different ways and so on. So that was just so I get it correct. Did you join this new tech startup?
I did. Well, actually, I think initially they wanted me to be an investor.
Right.
And
You're a wealthy German property owner by
well,
this time.
by their
Yeah.
standards, I
Yeah.
had some cash, and so
Yeah.
yeah, in my head, I thought, well, I could invest in other startups, and that could
Mm.
be but I never invest in something I don't understand, and so the reality, I thought, okay, well, let me figure this out,
Mm.
and let me go and learn from the bottom up. What does tech and AI mean? And AI was a later thought. We initially started off building software and applications for other tech founders that were business people that didn't have the tech
Right.
capability. It was a bad business model because the tech people have no money. And so we had got lots of shares in lots of other companies that didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
But we learned that very quickly on, and then became an agency where we built software solutions for large corporations,
Mm.
pivoted into AI off the need of wanting to find some automation in the way that we built things. So we used to get broken APIs, and you build a solution, you have them talk, the front end and the back end speaks to each other.
Mm.
And that's usually communicated through APIs. And the API ultimately, finding these breakages in these systems required us to do a lot of rebuild. And so we found our first algorithm that could kind of detect these breakages. And that's where we landed on AI, or at least the CEO at the time, Avi, who was the technical guy, was big on AI and educated me on it.
Mm.
And I was crazy enough to go on the journey 7-8 years ago when AI really wasn't what it is today, on building an anomaly detection solution, which
Right.
became a spin out called Stream AI, which was then the first product of this agency.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. It was an agency created this breakout product or service. What was your involvement with them? Were you involved with both of those organizations?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So I ended up becoming one of the co-founders. So I came on the shareholder register,
Right.
and I was obviously the spearhead of sales
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Obviously.
doing partnerships.
Yeah.
And one was doing tech, and the other one was doing operations. And then we built a team. So we bootstrapped. We funded it through agency gigs. We always knew that we wanted to build a product that had monthly recurring revenue,
Yeah.
rather than just the agency model. And so in order to, look, we tried to raise VC a number of times unsuccessfully. And I think we very quickly realized our value system back then, and I think it's still true of the guys today, was that you didn't need to go on a VC journey to be successful if your vision of success is different.
Mm,
And so it was very much a lifestyle business for 6 to 7 years,
okay.
generated good cash. We all did extremely well from it. But it was never a scalable business as an agency that's
Yeah, I was going
investable.
to ask about this
Yeah.
because some people start businesses and they build to sell from day one. They
Yeah.
say we're going to do this. We're going to we may or may not take funding, but we know this is the 5 to 10 year journey, and we're going to exit. And a lot of others say, no, I'm going to build a business. Could be a lifestyle, could be something I enjoy, could be a hobby, a passion, but I'm good at it. I can make money at it. What was the thought process there? I detect you were not built for exit from day one.
No, so it's interesting. So I've thought about this. If I'm being really honest, my view of that's changed over the years.
Right.
I think I started at the time wanting something to exit an event.
Mm.
Um, and I think going back to that value system, I think it became evident over the years that that wasn't necessarily the case with my business partners, which was fine when we're building an agency business model. Um, and so at some point, you need to understand what it is that you really want to get from the business journey that you're on and understand where the right route to do that is. So we spun a number of products. Stream AI was the first one. We got funding from the European Union. And so that was a grant. So it was free money. It's never free money, but it was,
But you
you
didn't
know,
have to give up
you didn't have
equity.
to give up equity.
Nice.
And we got that just before COVID. So that product, if you're interested, it was working with manufacturers. So Daimler, was a client of mine, Webasto, who are a tier 2 supplier to the manufacturing sector. They create the heating systems inside most cars.
Okay.
So heavy industrial,
Yeah.
Germany, it's the
Yeah.
bedrock of their economy. Lots of great engineering talent, lots of data.
Yeah.
It was lots of like time series numeric. So it was sensors, pressures, torque, dealing with German engineers that didn't speak English, and I only spoke English at the time. Well, to be honest, my German's not good enough to
Yeah.
hold a conversation with a German engineer today, but there was an appetite for R&D in Germany. And if you think about the first models in the 70s, they came out a lot of the German institutes.
Mm.
And so they're incredibly inquisitive and they like to do lots of research. So AI was a first mover in that space early on because they were looking for solutions to deal with their data and detect abnormalities in the data. So could we predict a failure of a system, an engine, a heating system, whatever it was, ahead of time so that
Mm.
the engineers could understand what they needed to fix before it fails, because downtime in engineering is a big cost base to that
Right.
business and the margins are already pretty hard to make money
Mm.
from. So yeah, I spent a number of years building a solution that I thought we had product market fit. And it fundamentally failed in the end. We ran out of runway, we scaled too quickly, we got that money without realizing what we wanted to do with it. And so often I think the lesson I learned from that was just because you get money, it doesn't mean you're going to be successful as a result.
Yes.
There's this big need or this hubris of, startup entrepreneurs wanting to go for big VC money
Yeah.
very quickly. And I think actually it could kill you if you're not ready for it. And I learned that lesson through Stream on a number of different things. The product didn't actually scale operationally like I was told it would.
Yeah.
And so we put the first 3 big clients on and the whole back end crashed. And by the time we realized that what we needed to do to rebuild, it was another 6-month journey. And so it was quite a precarious position to be in.
It's tough. It's
Yeah,
tough. But again, it's part of the journey. And again, it's interesting you say that. I've heard this has come up quite regularly. Constraints are sometimes very valuable. You don't think about them at the time. And there's loads of stories that people got loads of funding and they failed. Because,
absolutely.
and this thing about, bootstrapping or having a limited amount of funding, my God, you've got to be so smart. You've got to be creative beyond your wildest dreams because you can't fix it. But if someone gives you a ton of money, it's like we can do anything. We can,
Absolutely. And you get lazy with it,
yeah,
We scaled to 20 people. We hired some really expensive PhDs,
sure.
not really understanding. We didn't have the vision and value system to really
Yeah,
ensure that they knew what they were doing. And there wasn't enough, market. I see my job as a communicator and taking customers' problems and pushing that back into the organization so
mm,
they can understand it. The problem is when you're dealing with different people that do very different jobs, like a data scientist, a software developer, a product person, they all speak different languages.
right.
And so you might say something, but they'll interpret it in a very different way. And so I think the second time around, I understood that communication back was more than just saying it as I would see it,
Yeah.
but make them truly understand it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. I've had, again, people have told me that some of the greatest lessons they've ever had was through failure.
Mm.
That success didn't necessarily teach them a lot. It was hard to identify exactly what the success was. It could be 20 different things. What did you learn from that failure?
God, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about my business partners. So look, uh, that was one of the hardest times of my life, because at that point, in my head at least, I thought we'd played the game perfectly.
Mm.
We got free money. We validated that the use case we believed was correct. In hindsight, I don't think we really had product market fit. We wanted to believe we had it, but we didn't. Um, the clients were there, the early revenue was there. And then I felt like it was the tech that was the problem. And so I got very angry once that failed, because I couldn't see how I could have done anything differently.
You done everything you possibly could. You weren't in charge of the tech, but you
Yeah. And so in hindsight, I was wrong there,
right.
absolutely. But at the time, I took that quite badly. And I definitely think I had a bit of a, I wouldn't say breakdown, but definitely a bit of a burnout.
Mm.
And so we took the time, once we had to liquidate that business and actually pay money back to the European Union, because, they never give anything away for free.
Mm.
Um, we took some time out. And then we decided to come back in, because the agency, I was able to secure a big agency client with PwC, actually, Germany. And so we had another go at, coming back out. And we'd gone through periods of ups and downs, and, close to bankruptcy, and back to kind of really good
Yeah.
profits again. But I wasn't sure I was ready for that journey again, because I was still mourning it.
Yeah.
And so through that process, I think the thing I learned the most actually was that I was working on the basis of the end outcome, or the outcome I was seeking, being the deciding factor of success.
Mm.
And I learned through that it was a journey. And I know it sounds really corny, but it's true. It was a journey, and the lessons I learned there that we carried forward then
Yeah.
to the future successes of CodePan and then Real OA
Yeah.
and what I'm doing today. So I was very thankful for that lesson in the end. But we brought in some help. We brought in a consultant, I remember at the time, that we stopped communicating as a co-founding team. We were fighting, we were arguing a
Mm.
lot. And we did some crisis management, and we looked into ourselves, and we understood where those triggers and those communication barriers that we were failing in were causing us to actually be ineffective.
Mm.
And so we did
Interesting.
the work.
That's great. You got an external third party independent person in
It's a bit like
to help you.
therapy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure. It's business commercial therapy, and
absolutely.
it can often be really, really valuable. If you were, I mean, listening to your story there, and it sounded, I mean, as you just said, it was just one of the toughest times of your life and getting through that. And the word that comes up in my mind is resilience.
Hmm.
And you had to show resilience. You're still here, fighting the good fight, doing your
Yeah.
best again, with other sort of stories along the way. If you were speaking to another entrepreneur who was going through a difficult time right now, and there are some really challenging times out there, and a lot of headwinds in business in the UK and around the world, what advice would you give to somebody who's facing the same sort of challenges as you faced back in those days?
Yeah, I think, because everything's personal to your individual. I think being introspective and really having those moments where you check in to understand, am I still on track to where we want to go? And is this still serving me? Because I think I do a lot of work around intrinsic motivation, or I like the construct of it. I can't remember the chap's name. Is it Wolfgang Dietmar? I think it's a German sort of consultant, and he's got this construct of how do you stay intrinsically motivated. And so for me, resilience is ensuring that you're intrinsically motivated for a long enough time. And so the model is a classic Venn diagram. It's you have your hand and your head, and your hand is effectively the things that you emotionally want to do, things that fulfill you, they
Mm,
make you happy. Your head is the things that you believe you should be doing,
right.
because that's where your direction, your strategic thought. And so you can sustain and be resilient if you're just using one of those aspects of why you do what you do. But eventually you effectively, you reduce the amount of willpower that you have. And willpower erodes over time. And so eventually that leads to burnout, and you lose the resilience. And so, sorry, when you find the ability where they overlap, you're intrinsically motivated. And so I do that model, whether it's a task that I have to do, whether it's a moment in my business, I sit there and say, have I got my head and my hand overlapping for what I'm doing? And if so, I'm going to continue with it. There's another aspect to it, which is the third thing, which is if you've got the skill set. And if you don't have the skill set, buy it in or outsource it to somebody else. And that's where you can understand where your good business partnerships work, because you want those complementary skill sets so that you can stay in the middle of that Venn and stay intrinsically motivated to persevere. Because that's ultimately, you've nailed it on the head. I think half of the challenge is just staying around,
For sure.
to be
Yeah, you
honest
just
with you.
keep showing
Yeah,
up
it's
when
not that
you're
difficult.
getting punched in the face every day. Yeah, it's a
Absolutely.
challenge. That's interesting to me. I wasn't familiar with that. That's a great mental model.
Yeah.
It strikes me. It's like a more better constructed version in some ways than almost like the ikigai thing, which is
Yeah.
like what you're good at, what you enjoy doing, what the world will pay you for, and all
Yeah.
that sort of thing. And to have I think the patience and the presence of mind to sort of slow yourself down, because when all the world's sort of collapsing around you, you're just firefighting. So I think the opportunity and the ability just to stop, take a breath, and ask yourself some of those
Yeah.
questions and reflect on that mental model. It would pay dividends to do it. In the time you think, I don't have time for this stuff, going through those challenging moments. But I think obviously it helped you, and you got through what sounds like a really, really tough period of your life.
No, absolutely. And then, I think ultimately as well, there's a huge amount of luck in life. And so,
Sure.
had we not secured another big account with a big corporate
Mm,
firm to then do another agency gig, would we still be here today? Probably not, because at some point it goes to a point where there is no return
right.
and you have to close shop. But we didn't, and we carried on, and we then moved into a new area called document processing. We built a big solution for a big client. It was a very lucrative relationship over multi years, but it was an agency again, building something for a big firm. The product got acquired by their US team, and with that, the team then had to integrate this solution into them. But off the back of that, we learned a new skill set. We learned about document processing, and that's where ReLOA was born.
Right.
And so that's the
So that
journey.
brings
Yeah,
us up to date in terms of what has
yeah,
effectively been a very recent exit
yes.
for you. Give us the sort of 2-minute run through on what ReLOA is, what it does, what it did, what problems was it created to solve?
Yeah, so look, so I suppose to take a step back, I'd always wanted to come back into financial services as a sector. I'd
Yeah,
left
I
it
was
for
thinking
10
you've kind of
years.
come full circle now, haven't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I tried to come back a number of times actually, but I just realized that the industry at large wasn't really ready for AI and automation. But the birth of ChatGPT
Mm,
completely changed the game.
right.
It took, the problems are still as complex as they are, but it simplified them into a way that people could understand them and consume them. And so with that, we realized that you could build the same things that we had been building previously for multiple years in a much cheaper, more scalable way. And so with that, didn't necessarily need big funding to start a product and to find a solution. And so I wanted to come back to financial services because I understand that industry.
Mm.
I was selling in manufacturing, not understanding the industry, not even the language, to be honest with you. So I'm amazed that we managed to continue the way we
Yeah,
did.
I was just thinking that you're selling in an industry you didn't know much about, in a language you couldn't speak. Coming back to
Absolutely.
UK financial
It was
services
great.
is going to be easy. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's never as easy as you
No,
think it's
but
going to be, but it was great to kind of come back to my old
right.
network and to, I think I came in at a right time as
Mm,
well, where, people were thinking about their business models and thinking about, is technology going to be, a part of that way of scaling what is effectively a broken business model?
yeah.
Consolidation is rife in that sector. And so, all the ingredients are there for adoption to come through. And I think adoption is really important in AI,
Mm,
that people miss. They I don't know, they don't think about it enough.
mm,
Just because you throw a great tool at someone that's a human, it's not going to mean they're going to use it.
right.
um and so for that basis, we brought document processing that we'd learned for the last 3-4 years at that point, and thought about some particular broken workflows in the financial advice journey, which was, quite boring stuff, just taking information from documents and pulling it into a spreadsheet
Mm,
effectively. But it was one of those low-hanging fruit use
mm,
cases that didn't really offend anyone. They could
yeah.
understand the benefit of it. So we became best of breed in that space,
Yeah.
and you linked it to a workflow that made sense. And it's still it's a viable business. It's there. It's been acquired by a larger sort of platform that's doing document processing for multiple different sectors.
Right.
Um, But I learned another lesson there, and going back to my Venn diagram, I think too often I've probably personally held on to an idea for too long because I've got that grit and that determination, and
Mm,
I'm like, no, we can make it work, whatever.
mm,
Um, I I think even I personally underestimated the pace of which AI is evolving. And so I see the future of the products in the market in financial advice today to be more complex workflows, not these point solutions.
right.
And so with that acquisition, I took the opportunity to say, right, that's a very viable business. I want to build something else. There's other things that I think we need to do
Right.
to have a solution in this space. And so I took that opportunity to leave when I could.
Okay. We'll talk about what you're doing
Yeah.
now. Just let's spend a couple of moments on that, because this was a proper exit, as I
Yeah.
understand it. You were a co-founder, you were a shareholder, you no longer are, as I understand it, or
Yeah.
you've been bought. What did that process feel like? Just talk that through, because from where I saw, and I was sort of an outside observer when this was going on, it seemed to happen really quickly.
It
Now, whether
did.
there's conversations have been going on for months or years before that, I have no
Yeah.
idea. But the whole from you guys first appearing on my radar to an exit was seemed pretty quick. So tell me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah. So to your earlier point, I think we've always, or at least I'd always thought of, let me maybe do this another way. I'd had one of a client or a prospect I was speaking to when I was, explaining I've been doing AI for 10 years. And he said, gosh, Gary, I've done something really right. We've done something really wrong.
Right.
And that really resonated with me because I hadn't thought of it like that. I was always thought, we were ahead of the game. We were doing this early on. But, it did really sit with me and think, gosh, we've not managed
Mm,
to actually, be in this hype cycle and do something credible with it, have that event. Um, and so that was, I think, the seed of me actually being really critical about where we are in the journey and less hopeful around the things that we could do versus the things that are there. And if there's an opportunity, we should take it.
yeah.
And so I think, we were all in our 40s plus, business partners have kids,
Yeah.
on this journey for a while. And so I think intuitively we took an opportunity that we could.
Right.
Um, I also think the reality, and this is where I see some of the challenges around AI, is that defensibility in AI is really difficult because you don't have so much of a technological moat as you had in the
Right.
past.
Yeah.
These models that you use are so incredibly powerful. The next releases means that actually, your product becomes a feature very quickly.
Right.
That's my opinion, at least. I think, some people will disagree with me, but I very much believe in that consolidation of what's happening.
Mm,
And so I didn't want to sit there having built a brand and a product that was working and believe that we could have then built and scaled when the market was moving quicker than we were, I thought,
you-
across this more complex journey.
sure.
So best of breed was great, but um, I was looking 5, 10 years out and I thought, I'm going to take this opportunity whilst I can. So my business partners are still in that business, running it through and
Right.
continue to scale it in the new organization. Um,
But for you, it was that a tactical exit.
yeah,
You just felt you didn't want to be part of that journey necessarily.
I wanted to
Yeah.
focus on financial advice again
Right.
and just be focused on that to the point of
Yeah.
where's that intrinsic motivation. I took that moment and said, right, well, where do I want to go?
Mm,
And does selling a document processing solution to multiple sectors across Europe fit with where I want to be?
yeah.
And I just moved back to the UK and I thought, No, I'm gonna
Right.
double down on this. And so I'd already knew where I could potentially end up. And,
Yeah.
I've been getting lots of requests to kind of join other firms, which I hadn't entertained.
Sure.
But then I actually started to have a serious conversation about what the future would hold. And so, yeah, I did
Okay.
that and moved
So
on.
fast forward, where are you now then?
So, yeah, now I am with a company called Saturn,
Mhm.
who are a Y Combinator sort of startup, run by Amal and Rohit and some of the smartest young guys I think I've ever met. I'm
Mm,
definitely one of the old guys. I am the oldest guy in the organization today. But they're in their late 20s, early 30s, and they have a product that does that whole suite.
mm,
Um, and they've built an incredible reputation in the market. For me, the turning point was they'd made an acquisition of another firm in the UK, which was quite early on for a firm to make an
Mm.
acquisition. And that really just gave me a lot of confidence in their ability to take risk and understand a dedication to a business.
Mm.
Um, and I felt like I could add something to them, but they could also add something to me. And so, yeah, I'm doing it all over again. With not really with the intention of doing that, but sometimes you just need to run where your gut tells you to go.
Well, that's what I was thinking exactly. It just intuitively feels right for you because I think from, observing what's been going on, you're able to marry those things. It is, you're back in the UK, you're in financial services, and you're at the cutting edge of this emerging new technology, which is just upending everything we've ever seen before. So it's kind of it's back to that sort of the ikigai, or the combination of all the things that you love and you thrive at. And so, the stars are becoming aligned, I suspect. You finally sort of arrived home,
Absolutely.
metaphorically as well as literally.
Yeah, quite literally. So, you know, it's a journey that, look, I think pivoting, changing, moving to a new area, to a new
Mm.
job, to a new country, it's a painful process actually.
Yeah.
That there's a stretch before that change and before the success of that change that no one really talks about. And the reason for that is that you're often kind of mourning the past and you're not quite certain on where the future is going. So you're feeling very uncertain in that journey. And that's sometimes quite a lonely place to be.
Yeah.
Um, but the number of times in my life I've done that stretch has always worked out really well for me. And so I'm prepared to give it another go and, stretch into a new firm, into a new country, into a new product, and really think about scaling it to the next level that it's going to become.
Yeah, I think it's brave what you do. I mean, if I
All
go right back
crazy.
to go right back to your early days. I haven't done half the things that you've done, but I did do a couple of things where I left a big company. I started out on my own, and what have you, and you hope it's going to work out well, but you
Mm,
just don't know. And it's this absolute fear of the unknown. It's exciting, but it's also terrifying at the
yeah.
same time. But that's why we do it. There's a buzz attached to
Yeah.
it. But when you look back at it now, and you've had more successes than you've had failures for sure, and things have tended to work out, even though they might have been terrifying
Yeah.
at the time. So you got to, and I think that's the core of the entrepreneurial spirit. It's just trusting your gut, trust your intuition,
Yeah.
work hard, apply yourself, and hopefully things do work out.
And take calculated risks,
Yeah,
right? And
variety
so look,
for yeah,
I think I was very fortunate in the fact that, I've had some financial stability where I could afford to take that
yes,
risk. I
yeah,
didn't have kids. And
yeah,
so, my story is obviously unique to me and, it's not as crazy as you'd like to think. But yeah, you're right. I think, um, I learned that from my dad, immigrant mindset. They take risks. They came here with nothing. My father doesn't read or write or didn't speak English back then. And used to do marble laying for people on the side whilst my mum ran hotels for other people. I knew inherently that if you don't back you, no one's going to back you.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and with enough grit and determination, the outcome's going to be better from where you started. And so, how bad can it be?
I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, I love that. That is again, your parents, they had no option. They came here, they had to make it work. And so
absolutely.
one way or another, hard work, just diligence, that's fantastic. And it's still coming through in what you do now. You then,
Yeah,
as I say, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and you're sort of
no.
still
I'd
grinding
like
away there.
I'd like to think that I could start to be driven by something else
Mm,
in my
mm,
40s now,
mm.
which is very hard. I'm still driven by that. I
Yeah,
want to prove that I can do it. I'm the youngest of three
yeah,
brothers,
yeah.
and we're very competitive. Um, yeah, I'd like to think that I'm starting to be driven by a different end game,
Okay.
but I'm not quite sure where that journey is yet.
All right.
I'm
Well,
in the middle of it.
that's for when you come back in the
Yeah,
podcast in a
exactly.
few years from now. We'll find out what the end game is. Look, this is fantastic. Really, really interesting conversation. Really helpful and thoughtful. I've got a couple of more questions
Yeah,
for you, and I just forgive me reading this because I saw something. I was checking you out on LinkedIn before we came here, and you wrote a piece, you wrote a post, and then there was this quote. You put it, and the quote is as follows: "The future belongs to those who see possibilities before they become obvious."
yeah,
John Scully, who was the
mm,
CEO of Apple
absolutely,
and actually the CEO who fired Steve Jobs, as
indeed.
I think. But I'll say that again: the future belongs to those who see possibilities before they become obvious. What do you mean by that? Or what do you think he meant by that? Hi, just a quick pause. If you're getting value from this episode, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit subscribe and leave a rating or a review. It's honestly the best way to support the show, to help more people find it, and to make sure that future episodes get even better based on your feedback. Thanks for being here. And now back to the show.
Was how I interpreted that.
Yeah.
And that was off the back of me seeing that the opportunity in the UK advice space is disconnected advice proposition.
Yeah.
That's the opportunity. And that was the pivot I had to make to myself. And so that's why it was quite profound for me when I read that. I
Yeah.
thought, right, I can see that that's the direction of travel that the market's moving to. And so I need to be there, and I need to be a player that's doing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes complete sense. We don't have the time to go into this in detail, but in summary, I mean, as somebody who's deep in the weeds right now in AI and
Mm.
technology, is the level of change that I'm reading about? I mean, is that true? Are we just? I mean, what's the world going to look like 5 years from now?
Yeah, look, I think you always have to be very cognizant of the fact that there's a huge amount of hype and hubris with everything. But this is a fundamental structural change in our society. There is no question in my mind, at least. The pace of it is happening quicker than even I had thought. But I think we are starting to understand how do we interact with augmenting what we do as humans so that AI enables us to do more. And do more of what we're very good at. We've got, if I think about more basic things, we've got a bunch of humans acting like robots. We've got lots of robotic parts of our jobs, and it's parts of our jobs. And I think that's the first wave. But absolutely, I think we are moving to a place where our society will change. And the way in which we work and interact with each other will be different. I'm not quite sure what the end outcome will be, but it's going to be a great ride. Yeah.
And you're right in the middle of it. You're riding that wave right now.
I've got another 10 years left in me, I'm sure of it.
For all you're worth. That's fantastic. Just last couple of questions. Are you somebody that throughout your business and entrepreneurial journey, I mean, some people read a lot, some people sort of listen to podcasts, watch videos. Have you ever found resources to be very helpful to you? Are you somebody who reads books?
Yeah, I read a lot of business books
Yeah.
because that's what I'm interested in. So The Hard Things About Hard Things
Yeah.
is great by Ben
Yeah.
Horowitz. It's just a great, honest opinion of how hard it is to run a business. There's so much, if you just read press articles of these great stories of these entrepreneurs' overnight successes, and there's such a thing as an overnight success.
Exactly.
And I think, there's a lot of hubris there that I actually think sets young people on the wrong expectation of what it
they
gonna
just see
be.
the stories of the big multi-billion-dollar
Absolutely.
exits, and without the
Unfortunately, I haven't felt those ones, and so I'm still going at it. But more recently, podcasts are great. I listen to Trap, of course, because I love to hear an advisor's viewpoint on their business. I listen to the All In podcast.
I do, yeah. I'm a fan of that,
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. I think it's a great way of understanding the macro view.
Sure.
And obviously, it's very tech focused.
Yeah.
And so, I do podcasts when I can.
No, I think podcasts are a great medium. It's why I do this, because I consume podcasts, because you can do other things.
Absolutely.
You can be, driving or in the gym or whatever. So that's
my Saturday morning ritual is go for a long walk, go grab a coffee, and just listen to the All In podcast every week religiously.
Yeah, me too. Fantastic. Okay, my friend, the last question I've got for you, and it is one that I ask everyone. You've been on your own entrepreneurial journey. You've had ups and downs, clearly. Thank you so much for sharing them with us. You are in the wealth management space, financial services space. What's your personal definition of the meaning of the phrase true wealth? What does true wealth mean to you?
True wealth for me is having the financial means to have the time that you need to find contentment. And we talked about that through many periods of this. You can do all these things, but you don't have the time to do it. And so time for me is really what I see, particularly now. I've been working very hard for a really long time, and time is a limited resource. So I'm not quite wealthy yet, but I'll get there in relation to having enough time to then think about other things.
Yeah. Time. That's what it's all about. Well, I wish you, a great deal more time, and keep on doing what you're doing. If people want to get in touch with you, Gary, learn more about Saturn or what you're up to, what's the best way of getting in touch, get in contact with you?
Just come onto our website, saturn.org. OS, I believe it is.
Yeah.
I'm relatively
We'll
new.
find out.
Yeah.
We'll put a link to it in the show notes. But Saturn,
But also
and
linked me and
find you on
Gary
LinkedIn.
Abela, direct message me.
Yeah.
I love meeting people,
Yeah.
and that you always learn something from every interaction. So
For sure.
I usually get around to everyone when I can.
Brilliant. Gary, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you,
Really
Alan. I
appreciate your
really
time.
appreciate it.